Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, it's been quite some time since I last uploaded a video on the Station Road channel. This last month has just been absolutely chaotic. I just have not found any chunk of free time to work on the layout in any way whatsoever. So nothing to report on that front, but I thought I would return to our Rapido 15XX locomotive. Now, that was the last video, and of course it was about all the issues I had, the locomotive I returned, and of course the replacement loco, which is the one here, which they sent back to me. So in today's video, what we're actually going to look at is installing a stay alive in this locomotive. So if you refer back to the previous video, of course, about the 15XX, the replacement they sent through was definitely a vast improvement in terms of performance from the initial locomotive I bought. Apart from a few things that had broken off the locomotive, the running side of it was certainly much better, but in saying that, it was still really not what I was expecting from a brand new locomotive. So my thoughts are pop a stay alive in it, and hopefully that will actually improve its running characteristics. So what I'm actually going to do is install a DCC Concepts Next 18 decoder, which of course comes with the pre-wired leads to be able to add a stay alive. But before we get into that, what I want to do is just run the locomotive as it is now on this test track and just see how it goes. Now, this has got the Daypol Next 18 Imperium decoder in it, and as far as I'm aware, there was no way to add stay alive capacitors, or at least not without using a microscope to solder something onto these tiny little wee decoder chips. So we've got it here on the test track, and we're just going to power it up and see how it goes. So we're just going to notch it up a little bit at a time. Now, so we're only on speed step 1, or this is not even really a speed step because DigiKaiser's got a sort of funny system, but it is crawling along. It's a little bit jerky. Now, this locomotive has been running. It did get 30 minutes in each direction, so you can clearly see there's a little bit of cogging there, and I don't think there's really sort of any way of remedying that, really, no matter how much running in you can actually do with this locomotive. And we'll just bring it up a little bit further in speed. And the irony will be is it's now actually going to work, whereas I was trying it before off camera and sure enough it would just stop. So this is beautifully clean track. I've just cleaned this and it seems to be doing it. I'm just going to change direction now. And what do you know, it's running reasonably okay. Now, I will run it over some point work on the main layout, and we can have a look there, although these will be electrofrog points and things like that, so theoretically it shouldn't have an issue. So it does have quite a refined crawl speed, but as you can see, it does have that jerky motion to it. And as I said, it's not going to do it. it's not going to stop. It was doing it before, it's not doing it now. As soon as you get the camera out, it doesn't do what it was doing before. So we'll just bring it up a bit in speed. So once it gets past a certain point, it does have quite a smooth motion. It's not doing it. So what I'm going to actually do is we'll pop it over. I've got a bit of track work over that way. Of course I'll clean it, it'll be beautifully clean, and we'll just try it there and see how it goes on the main layout and see if I can capture it misbehaving and stopping. So it's now operating on the main line, and so far so good, and it's probably not going to do it again on this section of track where it's running through a few points. I've got this on speed step 3. Down to speed step 2. And it's not having any issues whatsoever. So it's not behaving how it was off camera before I started this video. So a little bit frustrating. But what I might do is actually just run this locomotive around the entire layout and just video it and see how it goes around the entire layout. I just want to see really if I can capture any points where it's struggling or losing power through its contacts. Now this track has been recently cleaned, so it shouldn't be too dirty, and it seems to be operating fine. So does it need a stay alive? Well, I'm going to install one anyway. Oh, there goes a little bit. Oh, that's interesting. So I'm trying this section of track again, and now I've just got it on speed step 10. So I just want to see what it... It's definitely got quite a bit of a jerky movement here. And that power is hooked up. We've got our droppers on this section of track, and the track is pretty clean. So that's interesting. Why that section of track? It's perfectly straight. There's nothing unusual about it. So I think based on that, I'm going to add it in the stay alive. Right. So it's actually running pretty well, so that's not to say I'm not going to put a stay alive in it, but the only issue seems to be on that downhill grade, straight level piece of track on a slight gradient. it's got the dropper wires connected to it, so there shouldn't really be an issue. It's quite peculiar that, I don't know whether it's something maybe to the weight of the locomotive and on the downhill grade, maybe there's some kind of resistance going on in there. Anyway, the interesting thing is I popped it back on the test track before I switched on these cameras here, and it stopped. It keeps stopping, so it's clearly camera shy. So we're just going to try it again. I've got the cameras on, locomotive, the cameras are not on. So hopefully this is going to actually show up how it sort of stops and then starts again of its own accord. It's quite unusual. So we're going to power it up. 0 no. Okay, so I'm going to have to give it a nudge, and we'll just tap it. There we go. So I'll pop it on 2 and we'll just see what happens. Right, so this is what I mean. It does this. Now I know it's on a very slow speed step, but the idea is, you know, it's nice to have that crawl ability, and I have to factor in the fact that yes, it's an 060, it's got a very small wheelbase and a small number of contacts or pickups, so it's what you'd expect from such a small tank locomotive. So it's not really demonstrating, or I'm not trying to prove that Rapido's locomotive is rubbish or anything like that in that sense. And there it goes again, it's just starting to move again a little bit. It is really about adding a stay alive and seeing if it makes a difference, which it theoretically should, and we'll be able to run this at 2 or even at 1 and it's not going to sort of stop and start of its own accord. So based on that, what we'll do is we'll get inside this locomotive and we'll install this new Next 18 chip and the stay alive capacitors. Gonna go. Come on, off you go. No. Right, so we'll take the body off this locomotive and get the DCC decoder swapped out and the stay alive installed. So we'll just quickly do this. Now, if you recall from my previous video, I had, of course, the issues with the pipes here, or steam pipes connecting between the smoke box and the cylinders. I've now actually glued these to the smoke box because it was just another bizarre design issue. So here is our inside of our locomotive. Now I'm just looking, seeing what kind of space we've got, and it's pretty tight. There's a recess in here which looks like that lines up with this here, so it almost sort of makes me wonder how you're supposed to get wires past here, because ideally what I'd like to do is be able to shove the capacitors inside the smoke box, but it looks like this is such a snug fit that there's actually no way of getting the wires past that point. It's really quite bizarre, the design of this. When that slots on over there, and it's a very tight fit. I would say that that is literally clamping right on top of this section here, in which case I see no way you can actually feed any wires through. it looks like I might be able to get some wires underneath this piece, tucked in where the motor is. So this could end up being more of a install issue than originally anticipated. So our next 18 decoder is here. Now that's the Dapol Imperium decoder. So what we've got here is our Zen DCC Concepts blue decoder, next 18, and that is the decoder there, and of course it has got what we need, the Stay Alive wires coming out. Now this is a little bit smaller than the Dapol decoder, only just, and then what we have in here, and this is what I ended up buying, was the selection pack. So it comes with one of each of every size of capacitors, so I thought that might be the best option to sort of work out what size is going to fit in this locomotive the best. So the only downside to these particular decoders is, of course, it also comes with the control board as well. So there's this component here which is kind of big and chunky, and then of course you've got the actual capacitors themselves. So this is just a single capacitor. Then there is a 2 capacitor option, this one here, and then it sort of goes up to the 4 capacitors, and then finally we have a 6 capacitor bank. Now the interesting thing is, I kind of wish they'd do a 3 so it jumps from 2 to 4, and I really wish they'd do a 3 because that might be a nice in between. So I think it's either going to be the 2 or the 4. If I take a look at the smoke box here, now will that fit in there? It might actually be just a bit too tight. And then of course we've got to get this thing in here as well, and that might be an issue. It really could be quite an issue, maybe trying to fit this type in here. So you'll have to bear with me, I think, on this one, because the control board, which is this component here, is actually quite big and chunky, and the main reason for that really is the fact that it's plug and play. You don't have to do any soldering, which is a good aspect, but then the downside is that it makes the circuit board bigger. So somehow we've got to get that into there, which could be an issue. I think we may actually have to just go with the 2 capacitor to actually get this all to fit. So I think the first thing is we'll get this Dapol chip out. So it's the Dapol decoder. We're going to plug this in. Right, now of course if push comes to shove, this may have to end up in the cab, which is not a good look, particularly when you've got such a beautifully detailed cab and also firebox flicker. So I'd rather not go in there, but I think if I ran the wires over the top here, it's not going to work, because clearly the lugs for the screws, that you can see in here going into these recesses, and then this whole block I think fits snugly within that recess, so I think whatever we do here it's going to pinch the wires. So I feel we're going to have to take this off, and of course it would be nice to be able to take it off and just have it off completely and not put it back on. Gosh, there's some wiring in here that's so close to that flywheel, which doesn't look terribly good. But of course, I can't just put that back on, because then this body actually needs this to screw to. So what I'm kind of hoping is if I tuck these wires down, let's say if I go down that side, it's pretty crazy. There's so much metal in here that it's sort of, it makes me wonder. I sort of wonder about the sound fitted version of this locomotive that you can buy, which somewhere around here there must be a speaker or something. Oh, it's in the back there, the speaker's in there, in the coal bunker. Is that sound fitted locomotives, you really have to have stay alive capacitors, because otherwise sound cuts out if you get a bad section of track. So I'm assuming that the sound fitted locomotives come with a capacitor, stay alive capacitors already installed, but where do they actually go? Anyone who's got the sound fitted version of this locomotive, have they opened it up, and does it have stay alive capacitors? Right, so that's got that back on, and we've got this tucked in underneath. Now this is going to be the interesting aspect, is this lot gonna fit in here? And I may need to tape up this lot. Now I'd normally use some of my capstan tape, but I can't find it. So I'm just going to use a bit of sellotape. Not the best job, but it's really just to sort of see whether this is actually going to fit in here. It's just so fiddly. I certainly don't want to put anyone off maybe purchasing one of these locomotives, because they are incredibly beautifully detailed, but they're just so delicate, and I just don't think it's going to fit. I think it's just too big. That's just so annoying. No, I honestly don't think this is actually going to fit in here. It's just, unfortunately, the DCC Concepts control board, this part of it, so not the capacitors, but that part is just actually slightly too long. Right, so this stay alive fitting has become more of a mission than what I was anticipating. I'm actually now on the second day. What I thought I'd be able to sort of knock off my to-do list within a few hours is turned into an entire weekend of figuring this out. So as we saw in the previous clip, the DCC Concept Stay Alive components just weren't going to fit in the smoke box. I then of course reluctantly looked at using the cab to hold the circuit board part or the PCB part of that Stay Alive unit, and that didn't really work either. So then I thought, I know I've got a brainwave. So what I decided to do was do away with the DCC Concept circuit board altogether and patch in almost Frankenstein style once again and use one of Hornby's Stay Alive capacitor banks. Now that's a 2-wire Stay Alive system. DCC Concepts is a 3-wire. So I thought, well, how could I make this work? So with the very small amounts of information I could find on the internet, as far as I could tell, I could figure out that DCC Concepts, they have a blue, black and white wire. The black wire is the negative, the blue is the positive, and the white is controlling or powering the actual PCB board itself. So of course with the Hornby Stay Alives, it's just a 2-wire and it's red and black, black being negative, red being positive. So I thought, I'm just going to hardwire these two together between the decoder and the Stay Alives. And I thought, there's every chance I could pop the chip or blow up the locomotive PCB board or anything like that, but I thought I'd reached kind of almost the end of my tether that I felt like I just didn't care any longer. So I thought, let's give it a go, and to my surprise it does actually work. So once that was done, then it was a case of popping it back here on the test track, and of course I did all of this without any video footage, so we'll go through it again now so I can show you that Stay Alive clearly works, and it actually works exceptionally well. Now, does that resolve the issue with the locomotive's sporadic performance, and also of course on that downhill gradient? Does it solve that issue as well? Yeah. So we'll take a look at this part first, and I'll just power it up. It hasn't really improved the stuttery effect at low speeds, so I've come to the conclusion that really the mechanism is not that brilliant. It's cogging quite a bit, and unfortunately there's really not a lot you can do about that. It's just the design that's being used. So we'll take a look at this, and if I power it up, we'll switch our track on. So it's quite jumpy. It's not a very, at slow speeds, it's not until you get to maybe about 5 or 6, even 7, that it actually starts to run smoothly. But in terms of the actual Stay Alive itself, if I lift this off the track, it's still running, still going. I must admit the Hornby power bank is actually very good, so that probably went for a good 10 seconds possibly. So the Stay Alive clearly works, which is at least one aspect. Now when it comes to the actual movement around the track, and particularly on that downhill gradient, it really hasn't actually resolved anything. It still actually jumps down that gradient. Now I did a bit of research, and there seems to be something with relation to back EMF and gradients. So I thought I'd try some options where back EMF was disabled and then fiddled with some CVs, and nothing really made any difference. It still would actually sort of jerk on the downhill gradient, and to this point I just simply haven't been able to resolve it. It's something to do with the cogging, the gearing, or possibly it could be something to do with the valve gear, maybe in some way, but I'm actually at a loss. I'm completely stumped on it. Now, I'd really love to hear from anyone, particularly with regards to back EMF, CV settings for that, and downhill gradients. Am I missing something there? Should I be fiddling around and fine-tuning CVs for the next 24, 48 hours? Or should I just put this to bed, be done with what I've got? Now, unfortunately, I went past the point of no return with this locomotive. I cannot send it back now because I did actually modify the actual chassis in order to get that capacitor, the Hornby capacitor in there, and for the actual body to sit flush with the chassis. I had to get out the Dremel and chopped away a little bit of the bracket that sits on the top that holds down or clamps down on the motor, and then also actually chopped a little bit off the front of the motor bearing component, or the housing unit where the motor actually slots down in. Had to cut away a little bit of that as well in order for the body to fit snugly onto the actual chassis itself. There's just no room for movement in this locomotive. It is so full of metal that I had to do that. So I can't return this locomotive now, but to a degree it's working really. The only area, of course, is that downhill gradient where it's just not behaving as it should, and it's possibly not too much of a great loss because being a small locomotive, I'm more likely to probably use this in shunting areas and so forth within the yard, and maybe some small runs around there. Of course, that down gradient, of course, is not scenic anyway, so it's not too much of an issue. I actually tested it on the upline as well, but going the other way, going on that downhill gradient, did exactly the same thing. So it's something to do with gravity, it's something to do with the locomotive running downhill, and potentially something to do with the back EMF, which of course is controlled by the DCC chip, and the Dapol chip did exactly the same thing. So I almost feel like there's something built into the locomotive's PCB board that's actually messing this up. And at some point I almost felt like, God, bypass the Rapido PCB board and just hardwire the decoder directly from the motor. But I'm not going to go to that point. That's probably taking it a little bit too far, possibly. But yeah, that's the conclusion I'm at, and I guess it's not really much of a conclusion. We do know that obviously the Stay Alive works, and it actually works extremely well, but the crawl on this locomotive is not brilliant, and obviously something to do with back EMF is not brilliant either. Right, so this video has really reached quite a crazy, stupid length now, and I think I'm going to call it a day for this locomotive. So I certainly hope you've gained maybe a few insights. I know I have, but then at the same time I haven't. So I guess it's where it's at in terms of this locomotive. So thank you all for watching. Do take care, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.